Hello, everybody. This is Lady Shel and founder Laerun. How's it going, Lady Shel?
Very funny. I was still watching the commercial, actually. I was waiting for the commercial to end. That's why I didn't say anything yet. Welcome, everybody, to our Fantasy Grounds Unity stream A through Z. Today, we are going to be talking about our beginning using maps, and we are going to show you the tools that you use to manipulate the maps. And we're going to talk about tokens, how you get your assets, how to grid the map, how to set up your map in a specific area, which is map management or Windows management, and maybe some other stuff. I don't know. We never know if we might add something else. So I'll turn it back to Leirun, and he can start talking about what we're going to discuss this week.
All right, thanks, Lady Shel. So tokens and assets are basically your maps and tokens and handouts. There are a couple different ways to add grids and such to your maps. You can also make them invisible. We'll show you how to zoom to fit the map. A lot of the things that go into using maps do not have to be very complicated with Unity. The only thing that really makes Unity complicated is when you really start getting into things like line of sight or painting and working with layers. You don't have to do all that if you're not accustomed to using those type of tools. We're going to show you how to use Unity with the maps in a very basic way. This is not going to be something that's going to cover how to use all the map tools. We're going to have a separate episode later on in the series. And we're also developing our own curriculum in the college to teach all those types of things. So, without further ado, we're going to get going. So, first of all, when you purchase a module or anything like that, usually they come with some sort of map. So, right now I have Lady Shell's character, Hiena, and I have her on the combat tracker. This is an important thing to remember before you start working with maps if you want to check to see if they're right or if they're working correctly. Secondly, if you have a module loaded, which I'm going to go to the library, and if I look down this list, I don't really have a module per se, but I do have a map module. So this was created by Zovia. She's an artist, and she made a bear den. So it comes with 4 different varieties. These maps and images are already part of a module. So they are already going to be showing over here in the maps and images area. And if you filter out the group, provided that you have the module loaded in your library, you will already have these things here. So this would be very similar to, if you had like Lost Mine of Fandover or any other of the campaigns. And as a matter of fact, those will have line of sight usually, and they'll have all the little things added if it's an official rule set. When you buy stuff off the DM's Guild, you either have to do it yourself or potentially, depending on who published it, they may have already included the line of sight. So that is something you want to look for when you are trying to buy something. If you don't want to fiddle around with making your own line of sight, if you go to the Fantasy Grounds store, it'll already have that on there. But if you go to the DM's Guild, it's up to you to read the description. So I just wanted to point that out. But today we're not going to get into too much of the line of sight things. We're just going to use the maps as they were going to be used, like if you're going to use it in Classic. So the first thing I'm going to pull up here would be this bear den. But there are different views of it. So you have an empty one that's at night. You have one that's furnished at night. Then you have a furnished map for the daytime and an unfurnished. I'm just going to bring up the daytime furnished one, which is map A. So being that this is already part of a module and it's already loaded, I don't have to bring in any specific assets. We'll show you how to do that later, but this is just using it as is. So this map is already imported into the images and maps area because it is part of a module. And it has its own group, which in this case would be the bear den, which is a separate map module that I have loaded in the library. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up. And as you can see right away, this map is huge and it floods the screen. So this is a common problem that most people have when they first start using Fantasy Grounds, is they're not quite sure how this is supposed to work. So right now, this is huge. It's excessive. We don't need this large of an area. So the first thing you want to do is size the frame of your map window. So on the very bottom right corner, there is a golden compass type thing. And then there's a little corner thing. All you have to do is click down on there and hold your left mouse key and drag until it lines up closer to the border of the photo. And I'm going to take this whole frame, not the picture, but the actual frame, and drag and drop it to where it fits where I want to put it. And I'm going to go ahead and close this up a little more because it's too much width here, taking up too much space. So I'm going to go to Game Master mode because right now I'm in all mode. So here's Game Master mode, and that gives me a little bit more room. So I'm going to go ahead and stretch this a little bit. That's a pretty good viewable space. Now you could zoom in and out by clicking anywhere on the map except for like a token. And then zooming in is just a matter of mouse wheeling back and forth. If you get way off on your map, like let's say you're, like here and you can't see the rest of the map and takes forever to scroll in or out, you can actually unlock the map tool provided that that this is your map that you're sharing or something you're working on. And you can use this little drop down tool here, and there's a zoom to fit button. So if you click that, that actually fits the screen. And then see, now that I've closed the toolbar, it's no longer fit. So I'm going to go ahead and click zoom to fit again. And it actually fits the longest side first. So in this case, it's doing the horizontal and not the vertical. So if you want to get rid of this gray area on each side, you just manipulate these to where it's going to actually center and fit. Then I'll hit it again and it should be close. Now another thing you can do is if for some reason you accidentally move the map and it's over here and it's a big mess and you're not sure where to recenter it, move the frame, make sure that you have the correct space that you need. So I'm going to go ahead and restretch it. So I don't care what I see on the map just yet. Just want to make sure the window is working right, that it's actually right. Now, if you right click on the map and you click view, you have zoom to fit, which is the same as this button. And then you have a fill button, zoom to fill. So the fill button actually will fill the entire map. And then what I would do is click on the map and scroll back maybe like one click or one small amount, and it will bring you into a perspective where you can see the map and it's not too overwhelming or too far away. So when you're not fighting, you can just have your map, kind of centered like this. But when you actually get into a battle, being that this is a pretty good sized map, you're probably going to be changing views quite a bit. So this little center button up here, the zoom to fit, will help you recenter the map every time. So it makes it much simpler. The other thing you want to do is, as a game master and a player, you have to make sure that your token is coming from the combat tracker. I know when I first started, I'd go here and I would drop this character onto the map. That is not the right way to do it. That won't even let you do it anymore. They used to allow that. Now Unity is set up to where you cannot drop it straight on the map anymore. You have to put it in the combat tracker. If you did do it the old way and you tried to do that, the token won't scale properly and it won't be linked to anything. So what I'm going to do is drag Hyena, which is a Dwarven healer, from the combat tracker to the map. And now she's on the map. Well, the way that this is scaled and gridded, it's hard to really tell if this is the right size, but it looks a little bit small. So I'm going to zoom in, and I'll use this little compass thing, or if I click on the map, I can use the direction keys to recenter or get to the point where I can see everything. And if I click on her token and I scroll over it, I'm clicking on it and I'm holding the control key while I'm scrolling the wheel. So I think I would probably make her token about like that. That way it's a little bit more visible because it looked really tiny. Even though she's a dwarf, this is a 5-foot square, so she should at least fill part of that. So that is basically how you would take a token and put it on the battle map. Or you could take this shield or this friendly shield over here and drag it and drop it. And that would do the same thing. But if you had more than one character, it would do them all at once instead of one at a time. So that is how you place a token on the map. And that is how you center the map and keep it centered, is by using this shortcut or zooming in. You can manipulate with this little compass thing on the bottom right corner. It's kind of tricky to use it. Or if you click somewhere on the map that is not a token or an asset and use the arrow keys. So I use the left and up and down arrow key, and that will bring the map where you want it. And then I'm mouse wheeling in and out as I need to see things. So I think about a halfway point, with good halfway points maybe about there. If you're zoomed in this much, you'll see more detail, but you're going to miss the scope of the battle. So in all fairness, I really think that if your vision is 35 feet, that you shouldn't be able to see much further if it was nighttime beyond what your view here. So if you stuck this token in the center and you right click on the map and you click pointers and maybe draw a radius. So if you take that radius roughly 40 feet out, and if it was dark or dim out, technically she should not be able to see anything outside of this area. Well, I mean, these are walls and such, and there's little areas that are obscured. However, when it comes to sizing the map, I don't think it should be zoomed in or out much further than that. Because beyond that, then she's seeing the map beyond her vision. So that is something that people don't think about when they're playing. It's kind of hard. You can't really control that, but if she's like sees some goblins up here in the top right corner, she might hear them, but she certainly wouldn't be able to see them if it was dark out. So these are just things that you have to consider when you're in the middle of play. And I think some of the tools that are going to be coming up in the future will make that more clear. But for now, get a rough idea of where you should be able to see. So this is basically just real basic rudimentary thing about using maps that are already inside of your game. They should already have a grid on it. And if you want to use the line of sight mode, I don't think this map pack has it, but because this comes from Patreon, not the official store. But you would go into play mode and then you would enable the line of sight. And that would trigger it. But this doesn't have it built in yet, so that'll be on another episode where we'll start using that. But nonetheless, this one doesn't have line of sight enabled or active. No one's taken the time to draw it out and such. So Anyhow,
I
so
wouldn't want to do line of sight on that map. That looks
no.
really, really
The
detailed.
the only thing I would do line of sight on, honestly, is this cave, the bear cave. Everything else I would make terrain if it made sense. So like these rocks here, I might put terrain around it because they might be up a level. But if it's something that's above your head, then it's probably just going to be a terrain tool. Like this boulder might be pretty large.
And being a dwarf, most things are over my head.
Yep, and then like maybe do some stuff over this boulder, but other than that, we wouldn't have to worry too much. Okay, so that is basically how you would place things on a pre-existing map that already exists in your game. So I'm going to remove Hiena from this map. So I'm going to right click on our token. And then hit delete token, and I'm just going to delete all. There isn't any others, but just in case. And then to get rid of this pointer, I right click on that, click pointers, and remove this, or remove pointers. I'm just going to remove all pointers in case. So that map is no longer, doesn't really have much to it or anything valid with it anymore. So that is that. So we're going to move into another piece of this where you will need to understand the directory structure in which Fantasy Grounds is set. So Fantasy Grounds has a base or a data folder. So if you go in your library assets and you go to your view here, you will notice all these different folders. Well, most of these are from different campaigns or different collections that you might own. And notice over here that they've now put this next page arrow, whereas before it was a little tiny arrow on the bottom. So they've made this a lot more evident that you have other pages to look at. The other thing to remember is make sure you know which group you're looking at. Right now I'm in token mode. There's a portrait mode, and then there's images, which is your handouts and your maps. So make sure you understand which folder you are in before you freak out and say, I can't find anything. So it defaults to token when you first open it up. Portraits is your photo that goes up here on the top left of your character sheet, like Hiena here. Tokens are like this 3D top-down token, or maybe a different variation of this portrait. So that is the difference. Now, if you don't have a fancy token like this, you can have this, basically your portrait picture becomes your token. And then if you want to update the combat tracker, you would just drag that token over here or make another instance, which I've done. So that is basically the difference between portraits and tokens. Your portrait's more or less like a photo representation of you. Your token is usually a 3D or a POG top-down view, or maybe even a side view. Depends on where you get your tokens from and how you make it. Now, tokens can be made by hand, or they can be purchased as packs, or you can go to the artist's individual websites and download them. I recommend that you make your own little groups or your own little collections and label them properly so that you understand what you have. Because if you buy a bunch of packs and you go to load them, there's no preview image of the tokens that are in that particular map pack until you open the folder. And that could take a long time to find that certain token that you want. So you're better off buying them loose in most cases and creating your own packs. Now, the ones that come with the modules, you don't have any real say in that. You'll just have to use them or substitute them with your own. So in this case, for Hiena, I had a token that was commissioned to me. I'm in the tokens folder, and there are two different folders that I can look at. I can look at the campaign folder, which is unique just to this setting or just to this session, but the only thing I have in here is a black dragon. So this is only going to show up in this module. Now, if I go to the data folder, which is a hierarchy up higher than the campaign folders, these are where I store all my majority of my tokens. So, for instance, I have a pirate and ocean themed token collection. So if I double click on this folder, it is going to display all these. There we go. So I have a whole bunch of tokens. The Sahuagin, sharks. I have Kuatoans, all kinds of things that are related to pirates and oceanic adventures. Also, I have a folder for Bernardo Hasselman. He's one of my favorite token makers. So he has a collection of different types of tokens for adventures and monsters and NPCs. So in this case, I'm going to go to Dwarves, which is a folder I made, a subfolder that I put together. And then I'm going to find Hiena's token again, and I can drag and drop it onto her sheet. Now, at the time of this filming, I don't think that players are quite able to do this yet. I think only the Game Master has access to the tokens, unless you find an extension. I think there is one out there that lets you uh, interact with this. It's meant to cut down on memory, so that's why they made it that way. But I think they're going to re-enable it so you can go through some of the token collections that are shared and select your own token. But that is how your tokens are. You can have them in big piles or small groups. I recommend breaking them up into individual packs. Like maybe you would have one group that's dedicated. See, I have one for gnomes. I have a mix folder that has everything in it. I have an Underdark folder, which if you open this up, you can see I have a collection of drow and such. If you want to zoom in on this, you're able to. It just depends on which view you're in, and then you can toggle the list from list view to like this overall view. So that is just something you want to keep in mind when you're working with your asset folder. So this is just tokens. I'm not going to cover portraits too much, but portraits should be stored in your data folder. They don't have to be. You can put them in your campaign folder. But if you want those fancy images to be available in all of your games, then it has to be in the hierarchy in the data folder. If they are unique to that specific session or campaign, then you can store them in your campaign folder. So it just depends on what you're using them for and what your situation is. So do we have any questions, Shel?
So there was a question I answered already. We were going to show, remember we were going to show how to grid a map.
Yeah.
So we need a map without a grid now.
Yep, we're getting to that. So I went to tokens, portraits, and now we're going to go to images. So images is where you would want to store your maps and where you would place your maps depending on your usage. So right now there's a data folder that has an Arctic snow folder that I put in myself, which will be available to all campaigns, not just a specific one. However, if I was going to put it in a campaign folder, then I would individually drag those images into the campaign folder images. So there's different folders and different hierarchies within the back end of Fantasy Grounds. So in this case, the data folder, it has some Arctic snow maps. If I double click this bag here, it comes up with assets, cold and snow random maps. There's a heavy winter urban collection. There's some ice tokens, which are just assets. And then there's a winter city. So it just depends on what you're going to need. So assets are like furniture and icons with cold dragon breath and vectors for crypts and those sort of
Bearskin rugs.
yeah, bearskin rugs, exactly. So that's what that's for. And then these other ones are more like tiles, like big, big, huge tiles. So if I go to cold and snow random maps, I have a bunch of ones that are themed for things like ice. And these would be maps that you might use within your campaign. So while that's thinking, I'm going to start thinking about what scale I want to use and how to grid the map. And there's two different ways, and we'll show you how to do that. So right now it's churning through my hard drive. It's looking at my files. If you have a lot of maps in there, which I'm pretty sure I do, it'll take it a couple seconds to really go through all that. It doesn't load it until it needs it, whereas before I believe that Unity would load everything. Or not Unity, but Classic. I don't remember exactly how it worked, but anyhow, here are some maps here. Some of these have grids on them already. So even though that's the case, I still have to put a Fantasy Grounds grid on it. So I'm going to grab this Arctic Snow Tundra map up here. So you cannot just double click it. I mean, that's your preview, but it's not going to add it. It's going to give you a preview window, and you can import it to your campaign if that's the map you want to use. So in this case, I'm going to go to Maps and Images. I'm going to go back to All, which is the main filter here. And then I'm going to click the drop down and click on Edit Groups. And then there's this little green plus button where I can add a category. And it calls it Group 1. So I'm going to name it Snow Map or something like that. So there's my snow map section. Okay, so that is just a group where I'm going to put my assets that I want to use for this session. So these are coming out of my master list of maps, but I want to put some maps in here to use for my campaign. So I'll grab a couple of these probably. So I'll grab these ice caves. And as you can see, it opens right up. So I'm going to close this temporarily. And then I'm going to bring this other thing that's a random blizzard map. And this one does not have a grid. So we have a couple different choices here. So now that those are part of this group and they are part of my campaign folder, I really don't need this anymore unless I want to come back and grab more maps. So I'm going to go back to the Arctic Snow directory and I'm going to double click on Asset. And if I need anything from these vectors, I will grab them. I don't think I'll need them because a lot of these are just furniture and such. But if I go to the Arctic thing and I got these ice tokens, they're in different folders. So if I go here, there's a bunch of these icy looking tokens in case I need to use them for something. But other than that, there's not much else, other reason to keep that open. So now that I have these as part of the campaign, it's very similar now to what we showed earlier, which was just to select a map and use it for any given situation. Except for the map we had earlier already had the grid on it. So we're going to go ahead and put the grid on this one. So this blizzard map has really no grid. Okay, it's just a whiteout blizzard here. Not much detail. You can see a few trees, and that's about it. So what we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to put the grid on it. So there's two ways to do it. If you can unlock the map, and the reason I say that because some maps are locked, you can't manipulate them. But if you can unlock it, that means you can do things to it. You can add assets or put a grid on it. So the first thing we want to do is put a grid. So you can click on this scale grid here and start clicking and dragging if you want on the map, or you can just right click like the old days, click on layers, click on set grid, and then just left click and hold down until you come up with the scale that you want. And if you look over to the right, it shows you where you're at in scale as far as pulling this map to and from. So that's almost 100 per square, which is pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and manually type in 100 up in this upper right here field, and they're linked in aspect lock. So it'll be 100 by 100 for these squares. Now I don't really like the black or the gray on white look because we already have shadows that color. So you have this opportunity now to change the color of the grid. Now you cannot change the thickness of the grid, but you can change the color. So I'm going to go ahead and pick the color picker. And I went ahead and picked like a bluish color, kind of have it themed for the snow. And I'm going to hit OK. And now I have my own grid that has a blue color on it. If for some reason you don't want to see the grid, you can turn off the visibility. It's still there, but you don't actually see the lines. The other way to add a grid on here would be just to manually come in here, click on the map, and then just start typing in the scale, which means there's 100 pixels per 5-foot square. That's what the 100 by 100 means. And if you need to move this around, you have these arrow keys. So the arrow keys actually move and nudge the actual map in case you need to line it up with a door or something like that, or a wall. And I'll show you that shortly. But once your map is on here and you like where it is, you want to click on the actual layers button in the map tools. Click on the map you're working with and click on this token, and this will lock it. So now it cannot be moved. So if you accidentally drag it or something, it's not going to move on you. So that is basically how you would take a map and place it and get it set up for being used in Fantasy Grounds. Now, there may be other things you want to add to this, or maybe you want to, make more than one. So instead of just having this tile, I could actually add another tile to this. Instead of treating it like a big battle map, these were also meant to be treated as tiles. So in the tile mode, you would go to the stamp icon here, and you would go to your asset folder, which I had open earlier. And I want to go to images. You got to make sure you're the right group. Data, Arctic snow. And then I'm going to go back into the random maps. And here's the Arctic snow map that I just stuck up here. So instead of dragging and dropping this onto the map, I'm going to drag and drop it into the tile section. So now it's a tile. It's no longer just a big old map. So at this point, I can change the orientation of it. I can flip it so it's a little bit different. And then I can change it. I can flip it vertically or horizontally. And I can rotate it clockwise or counterclockwise. So once I have that on there, you have a color picker where you can actually shade this a little bit. Or, you could take it and change it colors if you wanted. So in this case, I'm not going to mess with the color, but I am going to click somewhere on the map to bring this map over. So I'm going to click it, and there is the map. So this map that I already had down, I don't need to worry about, and that's actually this particular layer here, which is on the bottom. So now I can take this and try to butt it up next to a given map, and it looks pretty clean. Yeah, it's hard to even tell. These maps were kind of designed for this, so they should fairly line up fairly well. Once you like the position, then you will lock it. Now that those are locked, I'm going to add a folder. So in this case, on the very bottom of the map tools is add folder. If I single click in here or double click, I can name the folder as ground or something like that. So I'm going to call this snowy ground, okay, because that's what this is basically. And if you look closely, it's not actually butted up very well. So what I'm going to do is unlock one of the layers. And I'm going to unlock both of them. There. Now they are both even. So it was off a little bit. Now I'm going to lock those layers. Now what you can do is drag these layers into this folder. And now that they're in a folder, and if they weren't locked, I could move them as a group. So in other words, if I unlock these and I go back up to this higher level, you can move this whole piece as one. The only problem with that is it's not going to be lined up on the edge here very well. That's close enough. So I go ahead and lock this layer if I don't want the layer to move again. So this is how you would link a couple of maps together and add a grid. And then if you wanted to, you can add assets. I'm not going to go into that too much, but you could go into your assets folder and bring out stuff that you want, like maybe some of those assets I showed earlier. I have the, see now I'm in the tokens area. I got to go to the images. All right, here we go. There's some ice tokens. So there may not be anything that I want. However, there's these cool looking mushroom looking things. So what I would do is go back into the stamp mode, drag this asset over to the stamp, and it will tell you how many squares it is. And then just click where I want to put them. So there's one. The next one. So maybe this is a weird little patch. I don't know. And then I'm going to take and rotate it again to kind of this diagonal looking thing. And I can't move these because this whole thing is locked. So if I unlock, now I can move them. And what you could do here is create like a cluster. And if you wanted to move the layers up and down, you can do that. Also, to make this look a little bit more realistic, you can take and recolor it a little bit. Maybe you want it a little bit darker or something like that. That's a little bit too much. But then you would take the transparency down, however you want to do it. But that would help. So I just clicked again and it's on the very bottom layer. So if you want it to be a little bit more transparent, you can take these, and this alpha layer will make your next stamp a little less dark. So you could do things like this to kind of give this a little bit more detail to it. And then I'll go back to the full transparency. And then I'll rotate. And you'll get like kind of like the illusion that this is like a pile of rocks and snow or something like that. So that's just a way that you can use this on the fly. And then you'll lock this layer, and those can't be moved anymore. Then when you go to play mode, you won't see that anymore. But now this may be considered rough terrain. So if I put, first of all, from our lesson, this is way too big. So we're going to move it to where it'll sit in our window space here. And then I will right click on it. I'm going to get rid of the tool. Okay. You can click zoom to fit. Well, that's not quite what you want, but I'm going to go ahead and zoom in so I can see it a little bit more. And then drag Unity Hyena, and there's her token. So normally, as a dwarf, she can move X amount of feet at a time. So being that this is rough terrain, I'd have to keep that in mind. I'd remind her that, yes, your thing says you can move 25 feet. So on her character sheet, it says she can move that. However, I know that this is rough terrain. So it's going to cost her at least 10 feet to move through here. So I'm going to tell her, hey, you can't just move through there. You have to kind of pick through it, kind of climbing on this stuff. So instead of being able to move all the way through, she might be able to get to the other side on her turn. So if I go to the options and I scroll down, I want to make sure that I have the diagonal distance set as variant, because that takes care of the diagonal movement. And as the game master, I have to hold the Alt key and drag her token. Okay, now I'm in play mode, and I want to make sure that I have this on. So her diagonal distance is now going to be variant. And you used to hold the control key. And if you don't lock it, you will not get it. So right now, regardless of what I do, it's not going to change anything. You have to lock the tokens. So if you right click on the map and click lock tokens, now if you hold down the Alt key, you'll start getting the movement. So there's 5 feet. So this thing, I'm going to add 10 feet to whatever she moves to get to the other side. So that's as far as she's going to move for this round. And technically, she should probably be up in the center. So if that was the case, I would have her hold the shift key and hold the token and put it in the center.
What if I wanted a dash?
That's different. And you'd probably have to make a save because you're going through this rough terrain. So anyways, that is just the way to kind of make things a little more interesting. Now, I'm going to bring up a different map. So I'm going to take her off this map. And I'm going to go to our folder that we made, or our group. And this one, it already has a grid on it. So this is where you can run into a little bit of problems. Sometimes the map will not be square, or somebody's already restretched it and they didn't keep the aspect ratio correct. So you're going to go ahead and click on the grid. And what we're going to do is it's set at 50 by 50. We'll see what it looks like. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is just click anywhere on the map and turn on the visibility. And as you can see, 50 is not going to do it. 50 is pretty big, or pretty small. So this grid here is probably about 200. So I'll try that. And then as you can see, it's not lined up. So you use the direction arrows. And as you can see, it's still not big enough. So what is it, 250, 225? So it's good to know what the scale is before you get the map. But you're not always going to know that because people manipulate the map before you get it. Especially if you're online. Yeah, that's not even close. So this is scaled at 300 pixels. So now we have gridded the map. And as you can tell, it's not perfect, but it's pretty close if you zoom in. And you can still change the color, although I don't know if it's going to make a difference. Yeah, it'll still show. So now you have your own grid on here, and it's in line with the original scale. And you can also change the opacity of the line. So if you don't want it as bright or as noticeable, you can scale it back to where you can still see the original line underneath it. So that is how you add your own grid on top of an existing one. Now, if this thing was to be crooked or off, you can unlock the aspect ratio and then grid it that way, but then it's not really a true square and your movement will be off a little bit. So is there any questions on that or anything so far?
Nope, but I did put the link to the map align utility if you did want to align the map with that, and the link to Zacchaeus' video telling you how to use it, which is very easy because even I can use it, and that is something.
So what MapAlign does is it takes an existing file like this, and if it's not quite square or original, and the squares that are painted on there are not quite squares, it will allow you to adjust the image to fit in a good and solid actual square and stretch the actual image itself back into shape within reason. If it's way off, it's going to be hard to fix it because sometimes you'll get a photo that was rotated a little bit and you really have an ellipse or some kind of weird parallelogram instead of a square or a rectangle. So it can be a real pain to fix that. So now that we have that gridded, we want to put the map to the size we want, just like we did earlier. And then, of course, right click on it, click view or layers in this case. If you want to enable a mask, you could do that like the old days. And then we can change the view to zoom to fit. And now there's a mask on here. So now that there's a mask and I'm in mask mode, I can draw my old starting areas like we used to in Classic. And I'll put Hannah in there. So this is just a, kind of a way to use the software in its most minimal state when it comes to maps. So what we did is we showed you how to use a map that's already incorporated in a module. I try to explain this. I'm going to go over this again before we go. Is your library is not where your assets are. It's in the assets folder. And in here you have 3 sections. You have a group for tokens, you have a group for portraits, and you have a group for images. Those are actually subfolders within your campaign or within the master uh, tree or directory of files in Fantasy Grounds. So if you open up Fantasy Grounds, the folder, you'll see all the other folders, but then you'll see tokens, portraits, images. That is where your master or your higher level files go. Then when you look at the campaign folder, you'll notice all your individual sessions. And when you open those will also gain campaign data and portraits if you add any custom ones to your existing campaign. So it will create those folders if they're not there already. So that is basically what we're going to cover. Is there anything on that list, Shel, that we did not go over?
Nope. Looks like we covered everything except for the map align, which I just gave
Yeah,
the link out for.
yeah. The map
So,
align is a tool that's you use outside of Fantasy Grounds, but once you export the map from map align, it should work better when you come to gridding and lining up these lines.
right.
So
I thought it was very easy to use too.
yeah,
Thank you for the sub, John Jay.
yeah. Thanks, John. So if you want to um, line up existing lines and they don't line up very well, no matter what you do, take it into MapAlign, watch the video, and you'll import the map that you're working with and stretch it a little bit and re-export it, and then you'll put it back in Fantasy Grounds, and then hopefully the lines will be a lot more even and straight for you so that they actually line up properly. My suggestion is that you don't get maps with grid on it, but sometimes you don't have a choice if you're doing a conversion, or maybe that's the only map that exists that you need. So you have to be ready for that. So try to find that out before your session. That way you have time to deal with it. I think we're about good, Shel. We've rambled for almost an hour.
Unless there's any questions, if you do have questions, please post them in the chat and we will answer them.
Yep. Or if you go to our YouTube channel, which we're going to upload this, and make some comments in there, you're welcome to do that too. So hopefully we'll see you guys around in the community. If you haven't joined our community, the join links are right on the page at the bottom. And Lady Shel has also put a link in the chat. So join our community and we'll help you with Fantasy Grounds the best we can. Our mission statement is to provide the best customer service and support for the Fantasy Grounds community. So thank